We're just ready to go. We had our meetings yesterday, took care of all things administratively. We have actually 104 players here right now. Colt Liero, who had a great summer for us, got a couple of things he's got to take care of and should be at practice shortly, but he's not here today. But besides that, everybody's ready to go. We had a walkthrough this morning per NCAA rules without a ball. Kids were attentive. Just got out of a special teams meeting, and really now it's just a time of, as a coaching staff, have not seen these kids since basically April 28th, and now it's just a kind of a continuation. Thought we had laid a good foundation and a good base for us when we went through spring football. It's up to them to take this through the summer. I actually like that version of it. I think it's they need a break. They shouldn't be with us all the time, and I think you'll find out where your true leaders are because they get a chance to emerge because there's no one around. And we'll see what those guys did, and we'll get our first opportunity to get a look at these guys this afternoon when we hit the field at 1:15. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Yes, could you clarify Colt's status? So it's an academic issue with him?
I didn't say that. I just said he's excused and he should be here shortly.
Okay. By tomorrow?
Shortly.
Okay.
Coach, you know, some positions, well, all positions, I guess, aren't really decided on the depth chart yet. At what point do you want to decide and kind of settle in on those in terms of before the first game?
We'll have 22 practices before we determine that, AJ, and then that'll give us roughly about 8 days before our opening game against Arkansas State. But we've everything's open. You know, we had 15 practices in the spring. For us, it's just really a rotation of who's in, who's out, so that we know what's in there. But in almost every position of our team, you know, what our kids are striving for, you know, if you're a defensive lineman, are you in the top 8 or 9? Because that's what's going to play. We're going to play 6 linebackers, going to play 10 DBs. We're going to play 6 or 7 wideouts. Same thing at tight end, 3 or 4 running backs. So everybody's just trying to see where they fit in terms of a rotation. I think we've really developed depth over the last couple of years here, and everybody understands that. You know, it's not about being the number 1 guy. You know, it's about being in the rotation because we believe if you're in the rotation, you're going to play, and that's how we handle it. So for right now, it's just how many reps can we get. I think the unique thing is how we practice. We get so many reps, so it's not like someone's getting shortchanged and we don't have an opportunity to really fully evaluate them, and we really feel we do, but we also feel to figure out exactly who's going to be in the rotation, we should take 22 practices to go through that. It doesn't really benefit us to anoint somebody today because, you know, we need to really get them to understand that there's competition and that, you know, we believe that will bring the best out of you. So we got 22 practice opportunities before we get into real game plan, game week for Arkansas State, and we'll use all 22 of those to make our final determination at any position.
Coach, with 4 new coaches in the league, Mike Leach in particular and Rich Rodriguez down in Arizona, how much have you studied them before they came to their current locations, and had you visited with any of them prior to their coming to the Pac-12, and how much will that change the way you look at the Pac-12 as you go through the season?
It really doesn't because we don't play them till late. We don't play any of those guys until later. We actually don't play UCLA, but we don't play Washington State, I think, till game 5. Or we play Arizona game 4, and you know. So it's just like facing any other opponent that we would have in the 4th week. I visited Rich when he was an offensive coordinator at Clemson. That was over 10, 11 years ago. So I'm sure he's changed since then. So it'll be just like our normal approach when we're facing, you know, an opponent and breaking them down. But we haven't done anything special for those 4 guys that have come into the league.
Coach, be it Mariota or Bennett, you see much benefit of them not having to leave the state the first 4 games and kind of getting their Division I leadership feet wet here at Autzen those first 4 weeks?
Yes and no. You know, I would always say sometimes it's good to be at home, but I still remember a vivid conversation I had with Will Takwafu. We opened up when Will's first time when he had an opportunity to play here, and he told me he spent the entire first half looking at the crowd. So, you know, you sometimes think it's a home field advantage, but I think this venue is so overwhelming for sometimes it takes guys, you know, a hard time. LaMichael told me the same thing. You know, LaMichael played up at Boise State, but then really his debut was down here in our opening game here against Purdue, and it took him a while. And he said, Coach, you know, when you're not playing, you kind of understand it, but when you're actually out there playing and that feeling's kind of, you know, it's kind of overwhelming. I would think, you know, basic rule of thumb is better open up at home, but I've had some guys tell me elsewhere, so, you know, we'll see. But for whoever it ends up being, it's going to be their first start, and we're going to be at home, so we'll see how that works out.
Chip, I know this doesn't affect this season, but just wondered if you had some thoughts with what happened this summer as far as the playoff upcoming here in a couple of years, if you could speak to that a little bit.
The expansion?
Yeah.
Yeah. I understand what you got. In 2 years from now, instead of 2 teams qualifying like has happened in the last, then 4 teams are going to qualify. And so it's basically a +1, I guess, is the way I look at it. But I don't know until you actually get into it. And whatever you ever get to, there's never going to be a set number because of how our schedule is, and we can't play everybody. And when you have 2, the 3rd team complains. When you have 4, the 15th complains. When you have 8, the 19th complains. So, the NCAA basketball is up to like 68, and you still have last one in, last one out starting in January, and people are complaining because there's the 69th team in the country that they didn't get into the tournament. So, and the fact that it is 2 years out, and our whole deal is worry about today. So, it'll be interesting. I don't know, and until I actually see it in action, and I know a big question all the coaches have is how are the 4 teams going to be determined? And from what I understand, that's still up in the air. So, I think it's a step in the right direction, but I don't know, at least in our lifetimes, if we're ever going to get to the way it should be. So.
Coach, you mentioned 22 practices before you want to set the depth chart. With the quarterback specifically, is that the same with when you want to decide on your starter? And do you have a deadline date that you want to announce a starter by, a quarterback?
Yeah, we'll announce what our lineup for the Arkansas State's going to be after 22 practices, so for all 22 positions. So they're all in the same thing. It's not like we'll have one position that's going to be on a different schedule. We treat everything the same way, Jake.
Chip, you've been here a lot of years now. How would you compare the talent of this team to talent of years past throughout the whole squad? And in terms of talent and depth, how would you compare it?
I think it's relative. I always look at it year in and year out. We may have been more talented offensively my first year here in 2007 when you look back at it in hindsight. You had Jonathan Stewart, Jeremiah Johnson, Dennis Dixon. You had 4 offensive linemen that all went on to play in the NFL with Max Unger and Fanucchi and Jeff Schwartz and guys like that. Ed Dixon was a tight end who's still playing in the NFL. So I really never got into comparing teams from now into teams we had in the past because it doesn't really benefit me. I don't get anything out of comparing them. So, I think we have talent here and I'm excited about it, but we're still a young football team. We have 16 seniors on this team. When the predominant amount of our guys, I think there's 65 of them are freshmen, redshirt freshmen or sophomores. So, but there's some talent there, but talent honestly really doesn't mean much. It's production, and that's what we're looking for. So, but
Coach,
it happens at every position, and it's unique because I think quarterback's unique to this sport, but I would still argue with people that the loss of David Paulson may be the biggest loss of this football team because of the value that he had for this team. And there are unproven guys at the tight end spot that haven't really played in games, and it's similar to where we are, at our quarterback spot. But I've got a lot of faith after seeing Brian for a couple years now and Marcus for a full year now, in both of those guys' abilities to play. But until they actually get in a game, it's always an interesting dynamic. Sam Rutigliano, the longtime NFL coach of the Cleveland Browns, used to say that you don't know what you have in a quarterback, and it's like a tea bag. You don't know what you have until you put it in hot water. And as much as we can try to simulate that in practice, till that first time they get out in the field and take a snap in Autzen Stadium with it packed, and I know they did in the spring game, but the spring game really is more closer to our 15th spring practice than it is to actually the opening game against Arkansas State. So, their first snap is going to be really our first look at how they handle it. And I anticipate them being very successful, but, we'll see. And that's obviously a big question for all of us.
The quarterbacks didn't.
Opposed to playing 2 quarterbacks? No, I'm not opposed to playing 2 quarterbacks. Everywhere I've been, it's always shaken itself out that one kid has emerged so that there has been, a starting quarterback, that has emerged, and it was evident to not just only myself when I had the opportunity to make the decision, but everybody else involved in that decision. So I haven't been in it, but I'll never write it down. It's kind of like in Pirates of the Caribbean. There are rules for pirates and there are guidelines for pirates. So these are guidelines that I kind of judge myself by, but I'm not going to lock myself into a box and say that there's absolutely no way we're going to play 2 quarterbacks. If it ends up being dead smack even, I've never been in that situation, so I don't know, but I don't think it's fair to either one of those guys if it is that way. So we'll see.